I am quite a competitive person, as people probably realize, but I'm also a person, and I'm an emotional person. I have feelings, and I feel very, very strongly about this issue. And I want to speak to you tonight from the heart, which is why I have only cursory notes, and I don't even particularly want to refer to them. I've been on a journey with this question for many, many years, and it's affected me vitally and personally. And I suspect it's affected a lot of people in this hall vitally and personally as well. What I want to talk about first is a documentary I made for Radio 4 last year to mark the 25th anniversary of Prozac, a selective serotonin reuptake inhibitor. Most of you will be familiar with this category of neuropharmacology. Statistically, a substantial number of you in this hall tonight will be taking an SSRI. It's just a fact. Something like 20 million prescriptions for these drugs are written every year in this country. When I went into making the documentary for Radio 4, I really tried to keep an open mind on the subject. But my background view was that the selective serotonin reuptake inhibitors were overprescribed. My feeling was, because I come from that kind of place and generation, was that these drugs were mostly often being prescribed for what used to be called exogamous depression. In other words, depressions that are caused by things like your partner leaving you, losing a job, an illness, rather than for endogamous depressions, depressions that are caused by a chemical imbalance. But beyond that, I didn't really have any strong views about SSRIs, or at least I didn't think I did. And what I discovered as I researched for this program and as I talked to people was that what I had assumed to be the causal mechanism for these drugs, which was that they rectified the low serotonin levels in people's brains that caused them to be depressed, that this causal mechanism had long since been disproved by medical science. And indeed, when I interviewed for the program the head of marketing at Eli Lilly, the pharmaceutical company that produced Prozac, he conceded that there was only a statistical correlation between taking Prozac and the alleviation of depression. In other words, the man responsible for marketing this drug didn't know how it worked. Okay? I think that's kind of astonishing, actually. Not only that, but the double-blind and longitudinal studies of selective serotonin reuptake inhibitors show, to my satisfaction at least, that a good brisk walk, a talk with a friend, or heroin are all just as effective in alleviating depression as a selective serotonin reuptake inhibitor. Actually, heroin's rather better. However, I do believe that SSRIs work. One of the people who I interviewed for the program was my own GP, who at one point had offered me an SSRI in order to help me give up smoking. And I asked him why he prescribed them, and he said, I prescribe them because they work. I am not interested as a medical practitioner in how they work. What matters to me is that they work. Fair enough. I think that they are prescribed by the medical profession in good faith. I actually think a lot of the people at Eli Lilly who make the drugs make them in good faith and make a whole range of other psychopharmacological preparations. So in a way, I'm slightly challenging the terms of the debate. I don't think that there is some evil cabal of big pharma types sitting there plotting to create new drugs they don't know how they work and flog them to an unsuspecting public. What I think the crisis that we now face, and I do think we face a crisis in psychiatry and in the mental health professions generally in relation to these compounds, is we're all in it together. And the reason why they work is because of something that we don't usually like to talk about in scientific discourse. They work because of faith. They work because we have faith. We, the people, have faith. And what we have faith in is medical science. Boy, do we have faith in it. We really believe in it. And why wouldn't we believe in it? The advances in medical science since 1950, it is not hyperbole to describe them as miraculous. Now, if you consider that in the days when we lived in the kind of societies that are exemplified by this magnificent sacerdotal building, you could believe in a sky spirit, and you could believe that a man in a dress was capable of acting as an intercessor between you and the sky spirit for your entire lifetime, while never seeing anything as miraculous as what a doctor can do for you in 10 or 15 minutes. Is it any surprise that we have faith in medical science? Is it any surprise that when you go to a doctor and you're feeling depressed, and that doctor gives you a pill and tells you it's an antidepressant, and you go home and take it, and it makes you feel a bit funny, because I don't know if anybody has read the side effects on SSRIs, on Prozac or Seroxat, but they run to several volumes and include every conceivable minor ailment in the book, from erectile dysfunction to constipation and back again, taking in the perineum along the way. And you start to feel a little constipated, and you start to have a bit of erectile dysfunction, and you start to stop experiencing an orgasm, but actually you never had one anyway. You think, oh, I must be feeling better from my depression now. It's called a nocebo effect. And it works. It works. The SSRIs work because we have faith in them. They work because we have faith in them, and we pay for them, and the big pharmaceutical companies get bigger and bigger. And the big pharmaceutical companies now fund scientific and academic papers. In some instances, they ghostwrite them. They fund the FDA board in the States that is responsible for approving pharmacological preparations. And what they also do is participate in the origination and collation of the diseases that go into the Diagnostic Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders that is put together by the American Psychiatric Association, and which is the Bible that sits on every psychiatrist's desk. And again, I don't think this is done in bad faith, but there's one word I want to plant in your mind now, and it's a complex term, iatrogenic, and it simply means a doctor-created disease. And that's what we're facing. The new edition of DSM, DSM-5, contains a lot of diseases that, in my view, are collections of symptoms that have proved to be responsive to certain psychopharmacological compounds. And what is happening now in medicine is that pathologies are being constructed around bunches of symptoms that respond to drugs. It's gone that direction round. The drug is arrived at, the symptoms that it will alleviate are identified, and then the disease is created, and makes its appearance in DSM. And just quickly, because I haven't got much time, the pathos of somebody who has a non-existent disease being treated by a drug that makes them feel sick. I see these people in my office where I teach at the university every day, my students, prescribe these preparations, deeply unhappy and trapped. It needs to stop. Thank you.
Thank you, Will. So our first speaker against the motion is no doubt relieved that Will is not suggesting that there are evil big pharma types, because he is a veteran of the pharmaceutical industry. Declan Doogan was formerly head of worldwide development at Pfizer, Inc., which developed the popular antidepressant Zoloft. He is currently CEO of Portage Biotech and executive chairman of Biohaven, a technology startup which is working on a radically new form of antidepressant based on ketamine. Please welcome Dr. Declan Doogan.
Mr. Chairman, ladies and gentlemen, good evening. I've been called a lot of things in my time, and coming from Glasgow, "Hey you" was one. In Japan, Dr. Viagra. And tonight, an international drug peddler. My mother would be so proud. However, I find it slightly ironic that we are having this debate in this building of worship. And the two gentlemen on my right, the high priests of no treatment, would have you believe that well-researched drugs are no more effective than placebo. In fact, as Mr. Self said, they are nocebos. They're no damn good, but they cause side effects. And it's pharma that's the cynical purveyor of these. I'd like to say this does a disservice to our patients. And I, as a physician, care about patients. I also care about the science behind drug development. So the SSRIs are placebo. What is psychotherapy? Why is tox therapy so much more acceptable than drug therapy? Is this the zeitgeist that we're in just now? And why is it that psychotherapy has actually lost ground to pharmacotherapy or drug therapy? Simple. It's just the power of pharma. We spend loads of money advertising, putting reps out there on the street to beguile unsuspecting GPs, prescribers, and indeed patients with, in the US, direct-to-consumer advertising. I don't think it's quite like that. Depression, ladies and gentlemen, is a killer disease. At least as toxic as some of the diseases it coexists with: cardiovascular disease, cancer, arthritis. Antidepressants do work. I will expand on this in a bit later. Studies over the past 30 years actually show that they do. There has been a huge increase in psychotropic drug prescribing. That's antidepressants, anti-anxiety agents, drugs for psychosis. And it's not just down to pharma marketing. It's far more complex than that. And I think it does a disservice not only to the medical profession, but also to the patient population, of which I'm sure many of you are or have been a part. Mental illness is a prevalent phenomenon. 1 in 4 Europeans, and probably up to a half of patients, will meet the criteria for a mental health disorder in their life. A staggering statistic is 20% of children in the UK will have a mental health disorder in the current year. This is not pharma going out and saying, diagnose more patients, we need the money. It's nothing to do with that. Depression and schizophrenia are malignant conditions and attract with them more than a doubling of the mortality, the death rate, just associated with the diagnosis. And counter to the discussion that we're overdiagnosing, I think we're actually underdiagnosing serious mental disorder. And I think it requires not just the minute it's diagnosed, treat it with a drug, not at all. Diagnose it first and treat it appropriately. And also the economic consequences to the country are ridiculous. Apparently it's costing up to £90 billion a year, not just in patients' loss of cost of quality of care, but also cost to the economy. I don't really understand why there is such an opposition to detecting mental disease. You may also hear and have read writings of Mr. Self, which talks about the placebos that we're purveying in the pharmaceutical industry. And we will quote meta-analyses, these large analyses of many, many studies, which when you run the numbers say, they're not much better, these antidepressants, than placebo. Well, there are limitations to the way those studies are put together and the interpretations put in them. But I would say that, wouldn't I? But I can go into further detail about it. There are eloquent protagonists for drug therapy, which actually say it's as good as psychotherapy, not it's as good as placebo, it's as good as psychotherapy over the first 3 months of treatment. I did a study some years ago in the UK looking at patients who were put on a drug you might know as Zoloft or Lustro called sertraline. We treated them for 8 weeks. And after 8 weeks, those that responded to the antidepressant, we allocated 1/3 of them to placebo. There was a substantial relapse on placebo, whereas the patients maintained on active drug maintained themselves in a non-depressed state. If that is a placebo, what was placebo? I don't understand what the accusation is. I'm not against psychotherapy. I think what we have to advocate for is the right drug for the right patient at the right time. I'm not against adequate research, but what I am against is a biased view of the world which misleads. There's no blood test for depression, and nobody said we've found the cause for it. We don't actually mean that if we give an SSRI, your problem is serotonin deficiency. That was a naive and simplistic view put forward many years ago. What we are saying is we don't understand the cause of depression, and we don't fully understand the mechanism of action of antidepressants. But we do know that the modern antidepressants are substantially safer and better tolerated than the older ones, such as the tricyclics, amitriptyline, protriptyline, etc. These drugs do work. The GPs are overprescribing. That's the problem. Blame them. Blame them because they go to drug lunches and they have a rep in the door who says, I'll give you a pen if you prescribe. That does a hell of a disservice to our GP colleagues. It's not like that. There has been an increase in prescribing, and that can also be due to the fact that there are smaller prescription sizes and patients are being treated for longer. So there is an amplification of the number of prescriptions given out. But there is also, I would call it, a societal drift. I think there's a demand from the patient population to go to the GP and get a treatment. We go to the GP for a treatment for a sore throat. If we don't get an antibiotic, we're actually not very happy. But it's a virus, you don't need an antibiotic, and it takes time for the GP to say you don't need an antibiotic. And the GP is responsible for prescribing. He is to prescribe responsibly. I do believe that the GPs are doing a good job in the face of tremendous stress and overwork. Doesn't mean to say you do bad medicine. You actually have to treat patients well. Also, I think the pharmaceutical industry is not doing such a bad job either. It spends a lot of money on research and development. I also like to know where the drugs are coming from that are going to treat the dementia that will afflict some of us in years to come. Who is going to help develop vaccines for Ebola? The ones that are making the excessive profits prescribing SSRIs, perhaps. I hope when you leave here tonight that it's not just simply a case of expensive placebos, pharmaceutical companies prescribing, it's bad for you. Actually, it's good to detect depression, it's good to detect anxiety. And I nearly detected a case of anxiety tonight. My colleague and friend, Professor Simon Wesley, said, "I'm quietly going mad here," as he couldn't find his script for the speech. And I thought, maybe I should give him a Valium. But then I thought, no, I won't. So in summary, ladies and gentlemen, there's a lot of complexity in this system. I do believe that, as Mr. Self says, there's a lot to do with feelings here. We're not here just to treat feelings. We are here to treat disease. Thank you.